Hi, I'm Ken Egan. I'm Executive Director of Humanities Montana. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you. Thank you for being here. This is a wonderful crowd in every sense. It's very impressive that you're here. Before we begin the proceedings, I want to share with you something pretty amazing that happened to Humanities Montana. This is a chance for us to celebrate together. And in fact, what we're going to celebrate is relevant to the event that's about to take place. About 5 months ago, we received a special award called the Schwartz Prize. So Humanities Montana was awarded this national distinction for what they call our public affairs programming. And public affairs, of course, refers to, we hope, civil, thoughtful, careful, respectful discussions of issues that matter to all of us. It so happens that for the last, really 3 years, Humanities Montana has been dedicated to public affairs programs. And the specific programs that we are recognized for, it just so happens some of the most important individuals who helped us to put on those programs are here tonight. So I want to take a chance to recognize them, have them stand up. I would ask that you hold your applause. Let's go ahead and get everybody standing, and then we'll applaud them and give them the recognition that they deserve. So first of all, we have one Jim Heckel from Great Falls. Don't applaud yet? Okay, go ahead and applaud, that's fine. So Jim Heckel, longtime director of the Great Falls Public Library, an avid mountaineer, perhaps that's the most important passion, but anyway, avid mountaineer. And Jim was on the board of Humanities Montana from 2005 to 2009, and he mounted one of the very first civil discourse conferences we put on. That was, of course, in Great Falls, and that was January of 2008. So in many ways, Jim was a trailbreaker, a groundbreaker for us, and it's great to have Jim here. Carol Smith. Carol is from Hamilton, Montana, just up, as I said, up the Bitterroot. And Carol is an incredibly dedicated citizen. She also served on the board of Humanities Montana from 2005 to 2009. Exactly, same class as Jim. And we're recognizing her because she went to the incredible hard work of putting on a conference called Reason and Respect, a civil discourse conference in Hamilton. And I think we'll agree, Hamilton's can be kind of fractious, a little difficult. And Carol had the courage and the tenacity and the work ethic to do it. So thank you so much for being here. Very, very good. And then we have here a very special teacher, Sally Broughton. Sally Broughton, thank you. 2009 Montana Teacher of the Year. And Sally, last June in Billings, brought 43 teachers together in a civic education institute, which is an incredible effort to infuse civic education into schools all across Montana. And we're talking large schools, small schools, and you're so dedicated to the cause. And in fact, we just gave Sally another grant to do another civic education institute. So thank you so much for being here. And now I'm going to embarrass some folks that don't know they're going to be called on, so this will be kind of entertaining. So we also have a program that we call Reflect, Community Conversations. And the idea is that a group of individuals come together. This could be a nonprofit group, a government group. They come together and they read short pieces of literature in order to talk about what really matters to them, to talk meaningfully about their values. And we have several individuals here who have participated in that program. They serve as facilitators. And in fact, I'm just going to note here, so we have Lisa Simon, we have Jason Neal. Is Jennifer Thompson here? Where's Jennifer? Jennifer's here. Any other facilitators, so I don't forget anyone? That could be. So thank you very much for serving in that capacity. So. Last but absolutely not least, I have an incredible staff. They work so hard to put these programs on. I think, I like to say we're a little engine that can, because there's 4 people in our office, and yet we put on events like this. So I want to acknowledge them. We have Ken Stoltz, who's our fiscal officer. We have Kim Anderson, who is our program officer. And we have Claire Leonard. Where is Claire? Is Claire? Lady, okay. Claire Leonard, who is our administrative assistant and works very, very hard. So. And thank you also to our board, which works incredibly hard. So. Anyway, so this is wonderful. And by the way, there's more information about the award and the programs over there if you have some time. So I get the opportunity to introduce one Brian Kahn, who's going to be our moderator for tonight. I was looking at Brian's biography and thinking, how do I introduce this person? He has such a disparate set of skills and such an interesting life. And I decided I just settled on a few salient features. One of them is he was a former boxing coach. That might be relevant. I don't know about what's going to happen tonight. So he's a former boxing coach. That's interesting. It's good for a moderator, so he's probably skilled in that way. He's, of course, the host of Home Ground Radio, which is a brilliant local program done about Montana issues. It's aired on both Yellowstone Public Radio and Montana Public Radio. I hope you've heard it. I hope you have a chance to catch it. It's a brilliant show. And we're proud to say that we provide funding for that show. So it's a wonderful thing. In addition to that, Brian is a recipient of the Governor's Humanities Award. He just received that last June. And I must say he gave an incredibly eloquent speech about the place of the humanities in our culture. So what's about to happen here tonight is we're going to have a public affairs discussion. And Brian Kahn, take it away. I'll let you take over.
Thank you very much, Ken. Can you hear me okay? I'm always nervous with these miniature mics. I'm a technological reactionary. I don't trust high technology. Anybody in the back can't hear? Everybody okay back there? Okay. First, thanks so much for coming out. It's a lovely evening. You could be doing other things. Appreciate your participation, and many thanks to Humanities Montana for sponsoring this discussion. It is going to be a discussion, not a debate. Debates are flashy and occasionally useful. Serious discussion, I think, is always useful. We've got two outstanding people to discuss the question of the state of Montana and are we equipped for the 21st century. The format will be pretty flexible. We're going to start, I'm going to ask an opening question that's after I introduce the speaker, so you know who you're hearing. We'll get opening remarks that will be succinct, and I'll ask a series of questions that I think are relevant to the topic. And then we're going to throw it open to you. And when we do that, I'm going to walk around with this very small microphone, which is on a wire. And so I'll hold it for you and ask you to make a question, or if you want to make a comment, you're fully obviously entitled to make a comment. Please be to the point, whether it's an observation or a question, and then we'll see if there's a response from the panel. And then we'll finish. Now, I forgot to ask, what's the time element here? We're starting at about 8 o'clock. You want to go to 9:30? Is that what, an hour and a half? Roughly speaking. Now, I have to say, last night, Pat Williams and Bob Brown were in Helena for a similar event. The subject is the United States government failing, I think. They both did a terrific...
Broken.
Pardon me?
Broken.
Broken.
Was it broken?
Was it broken? And there was a big debate whether it was broken or failing. No, there was a serious discussion. and they both did a terrific job. And they're both gluttons for punishment. Pat more so because he's back on the panel here, and Bob Brown is in the audience. I want to thank Bob Brown for his terrific participation last night and your being here. All right, now I'm going to introduce these guys, and because they've done so much, I have to read. I apologize. And if I look disorganized in terms of the way I put papers on the floor, that's the way I am. We're going to start with Lawrence Grossfield from Big Timber, who comes from a third-generation, rock-ribbed Republican family. And when he was 6 years old, at a big family gathering, he announced firmly that he was going to be a lifelong Democrat. Now, actually, that didn't happen. I just want to make sure you guys are paying attention. Lawrence earned a Bachelor of Arts in Business Administration from Colorado State University, began working full-time on the family ranch in 1973, became a co-owner in the 80s, correct? Okay. He served as a medic during the Vietnam War. His public service includes, but is not limited to, President of the Montana Association of Counties, member of the Board of Natural Resources and Conservation, State Water Plan Advisory Council, and the Sweetgrass County Planning Board. He served as a Montana State Senator for 3 terms from 1991 to 2003 and served on a wide range of committees. Rumor has it he occasionally has time for fly fishing, although he claims he's a hard-working rancher that never gets a moment's break. He's also a fan of live theater and music, and I will just say, I've known Lawrence for about 20 years, as I've known Pat Williams, and they are both highly intelligent, highly honorable, and guys with a good sense of humor. So, Lawrence, many thanks for making the trip over from Big Timber. Pat Williams, who is a Democrat. Although, I have to say this, Pat, I didn't want to get into this publicly, but both he and his wife are Yankees fans. Now, I have to tell you, this is
Calm down. Calm down. Calm down.
That's the toughest thing you're going to hear about him tonight. Served 2 terms in the 1960s as a state legislator from Silver Bow County before serving as Montana's congressman from 1979 to 97, the longest tenured congressman in the history of this state. He was Deputy Whip of the U.S. House, Chairman of the Post-Secondary Education Committee, a member of the House Natural Resources Committee. In addition, he was, during a tough time that many of you will remember, the champion of artistic freedom for the United States. And when history is written, that's going to be part of it. In addition to teaching at the University of Montana, he presently writes columns for a number of newspapers and websites in Montana and the West, and has a regular commentary on Montana Public Radio. Okay, now I've got to find my first question here. There it is. Very cleverly, I put it in italic type so I could find it. Now, again, we're talking about a serious question. The state of Montana, are we equipped for the 21st century? And we're going to talk about past, present, and future. And as an exemplification, as the most boiled down example of what we're talking about, are these 2 bottles. When I first came to Montana in 1966 to work on a cattle ranch in the Madison Valley, this kind of discussion would inevitably be accompanied by a bottle of whiskey. Okay? Kentucky whiskey, bourbon, or in this case, Tennessee sour mash. Now, Lauren and I are imbibing in this, but the maitre d' said no man from Butte in this establishment can get close to any alcoholic beverage. So Pat is being boycotted. I apologize for that, Pat, but that's the new Montana. What can I tell you? And the point is, now if we have this discussion in Montana, some people would be drinking wine. And in fact, that does reflect a significant change in culture. And it's also, since Lauren and I are going to have a drink, you can see which side of the divide we're on. All right, the first question. Before assessing where we stand now, how do you see the key changes we've seen in our state over the past 25 years or so? We've had strong population growth, land ownership transition, cultural change, arguably a shift in our approach to natural resources, perhaps a change in our politics. What's the most important in all this from your perspective? Lawrence, would you mind beginning?
No, that'd be fine. First I got to ask, are there any county commissioners in the room?
I'm a former county commissioner.
Okay, well, if there aren't, then never mind. There was just a slight error in your introduction, but since there's nobody here that'll know the difference, it doesn't matter.
Thank you. It's only a slight error. You got off easy.
Yeah, but the night's young.
True enough.
You know, we have had population growth in Montana, but I'm not so sure that it's what was the word you used? Significant, strong population growth. We've had about 20% growth in the last 25 years or so. You know, divide that by the year, and it's not that much. But more significantly, the average population growth in the western states, all the western states, is more, it's in the 60s, 60 to 65%. So we are way below most other states, with the exception of Wyoming. They're the only western state that came in with less growth. But nevertheless, it's been growth, and I think most of that growth has been influx as opposed to more babies. But I would almost guess that influx is a number bigger than the 20% because we've also had a lot of outmigration. A lot of our babies have left. And that's an issue that we have struggled with, and I think continue to struggle with. As far as land ownership, yeah, there's been a big change in land ownership throughout Montana, especially in western Montana, but in eastern Montana too. And a significant percentage of Montana is now owned by non-residents, people who may or may not live here more than a little bit of time in a year, people that have different ideas, different goals, and different lifestyles. So that's a significant change. A possible shift, I think you said, from natural resource-based economy, I would say a dramatic shift from a natural resource-based economy. Certainly before the 70s, we were a natural resource-based economy. We still are to some extent, but not nearly like we were. That's a very significant change. Politically, there's been a trend, an increasing trend, I think since probably the 80s or 90s at least, toward a lot more citizen participation in the details of government. Not just the big picture, you know, in the legislatures in town, but the details, the administrative hearings, the rule-making procedures, and so on. Montanans have decided to pay a lot more attention to that. I think that's largely due to the environmental awakening that began in the 70s in Montana and throughout the country, really, and a recognition that some of the natural resource industry in this state, or maybe much of it, I don't know, had been acting in a way that now was seen not to be appropriate. At the time in the 60s, the 50s, the 30s, the 1890s, it was probably state of the art. But now with an awakening consciousness, there was understanding that the environmental safeguards were inadequate. And so that was a big part of the reason that people got involved. And of course, where there's an action, there's a reaction. So people in the industries or people more concerned about economic development reacted. Culturally, I guess I would say we've become more involved but less tolerant. I think we have become more aware, but we're narrower in our perspective. We're less patient than we used to be. I think we're less open to change, frankly, and especially regarding something that's in my backyard. The whole NIMBY syndrome is alive and very well in Montana and continues to be. And it doesn't really matter what it is. I mean, it might be a subdivision, it might be a gravel pit, it might be a mine, it might be, a few years ago, it was a Mormon church coming to Billings. A few years before that, it was an interstate interchange in Helena. I mean, it doesn't really matter what it is if it's a significant development. You know, don't do it in my backyard. And that's a significant change as well. I guess that's kind of my perspective on the question. I know that we're going to get into a lot more detail on many of these aspects as we get to some more questions.
That's great. Thank you very much, Lawrence.
Pat, one thing I thought about when I was talking about the population increase, and you served as Montanan's lone congressman, but also you served as one of two. And, you know, Montana is, I think, one of 7 states now with only one. But we are the state with the highest population. We have, that one seat has the highest population of any in Montana. So now we're going into a census, and the question is, will we have enough to get another one? And really, my question to you is, are we better off with 1 or 2?
Yeah, we're better off with 2, and we're stuck with 1, including in the next census.
You think so?
There's no way. Oh, yeah, it's a certainty. There's no, the math's not going to work. We're not going to pick up another one. We're growing. Obviously, our population is growing, Lawrence, but it's not growing faster than the national average.
Right.
And that's what you have to do to pick one up. So we're not going to get one. I wish we would. 1 is better. 2 is better than 1 because you're on more committees. And, you know, you're better for the state. If I might make a comment and then do an introduction, take a piece of your job. First, the comment. He mentioned he was a boxing coach. He taught Muhammad Ali the Ali Shuffle. You can tell the way he is on home ground radio. He didn't actually do that. I just thought it would enliven the...
Woke him up.
Embarrass me. You did well. I'm red in the face now.
And I do want you to know, even though a medication I'm taking will not allow me to have any of those wonderful 2 bottles, those bottles are only here because I'm from Butte. Although it would be Jameson, not Jack Daniels, if I did. Okay, now if I may, an introduction. An old friend of mine is here on the evaluation committee of the humanities. This friend of mine and his colleagues are here to decide how Ken's doing. Nobody wants to comment on that? And also, you know, how the programs are working out and whether we'll have a Board of Humanities in Montana. So we want to be nice to this guy. My friend from Boise, Idaho, Mark Johnson, please stand. Mark and former Governor Cecil Andrus have worked together for, I suppose, 25 or 30 years. They're in the same firm together, and the humanities are in good hands because of Mark's efforts in Idaho and now his involvement in Montana. I don't know if I ought to say, I know I'm using my time, but it's a good purpose here. I don't know if I ought to say this, Mark, because I don't know how committed you are after all the research you've done, but Mark is writing a book about our Senator B.K. Wheeler. And you can sign up to buy one. They're only $140. Right up.
I will finish it, Pat.
You will? All right. Good. I know you will. First, about Montana's population. I'll just hit a couple of these. I agree with what you said, Lawrence. About Montana's population, for a long time, Montanans talked about building a fence around the state, you know, so we wouldn't get overpopulated. Fat chance of that, right? And then it was that, oh, all the Californians are coming up here. So, I'm sorry, the University of Montana, and I work specifically there, teach there, and then have an office down at a place called the Center for the Rocky Mountain West, which is a university center, has done some research along with other groups on it, and we found out that the thing about Californians coming here was a total myth. Very small percentage of Californians. A lot of Minnesotans and Midwesterners, but you know who's repopulating, if we want to use that word? Montanans coming home. Half are Montanans coming back. Here's to them. Politically, in the past maybe 20 years, Montana generally, with its local, not school board, I haven't looked at that, but city, state, and federal elections has gone 20 years ago, and before that, you know, it was different, but about 20 years ago, we've gone from purple. Montana's never been red or blue state. Politically, we've gone from purple to a darker crimson shade of purple, but not quite red, and now back to a slightly more blue shade of purple.
You got that, everybody?
So we've gone from, you know, moderately Republican to moderately Democrat, don't have it in order, back again. It seems to me this is the thing to know about Montanans that maybe we don't pay enough attention to. We're independents, right? We cross tickets, right? We make up our minds, and if it's a Democrat or Republican, makes no difference, right? Wrong. We are more predictable than any state in America. 62% of Montanans vote the same way every time. 32% Republicans, 30% will vote Democrat. Come hell or high water, they'll vote for Mickey Mouse if he's on the right ticket. That's how we are. Now, is there a moving middle? Oh, sure, there is in every state, but there's a smaller moving middle in Montana. That's surprising to us because, you know, we're just like every Westerner. We believe our own myths. There was a wonderful administrator when I first got to Montana, the head of the liberal arts department, who called me in, and he and I visited a lot. Harry, when I first got back, I visited with you. I remember when I first got back, and I visited with Dean Fleitner a lot. And I told him, I said, President Dennison and others have asked me to write regular columns as part of my job, as long as they're in political. So if you've ever read a political column of mine, I did it at home. I didn't do it on the job. And no doubt you've read a political column of mine through at least 10, 15 years ago. Fleitner and I were talking about that, and when he found out I was going to write a column, he said, oh, well, you know, there's one thing, Pat, that I think you have to know about we Westerners in order to be accurate in columns. And I said, what's that, Dean? And he said, we are full of shit. Now, I'm not so sure we are, but I think maybe in many ways we are not, but that's what he wanted to say. Now about economic transition. The Northern Rockies probably from Denver up, have gone through an incredible transition, economic transition, during the past 2 decades. Our economies, and particularly in Idaho and Montana, were so organized around natural resource extraction that our motto was Ore y Plata, gold and silver. And we were known as the treasure state, meaning we like to think of a lot of the state as a treasure, but it meant the treasure's in the ground, according to the notes I've been able to find. Other states are the same way, but very heavily depended upon and had a culture of extractive industry. In the past 20 years, we've gone through an enormous transition and moved from an extractive economy culture to something else that we haven't named yet, but restoration, recreation, restoration, I guess I said that, vacation, tech, some kind of an economy that we haven't named yet, but it's no longer a heavy extraction economy. We'll have to decide as we go along, I suppose, whether that's good or bad, but the fact that it's real is identified with just one figure, and I'll close this question with this. Take all the timber and mining in Montana, add to it all the logging, and it's 1.8% of our employment. Yeah. Used to be a sign outside of Kalispell that said, welcome to Kalispell in Flathead County, where 60% of the people are employed in the timber industry. There were never 60% of the people employed up that, but they kept that sign up all the time. I criticized it in a couple of columns. People thought it meant I was against the timber industry. I wasn't against them all, I was just for facts. So I'll turn back to Brian.
Let's pick up on that issue. I thought the comment was very interesting that Lawrence made about we're more aware, narrower, NIMBY issue, a higher level of citizen participation around environmental issues. So how do you see this transition? First, Lawrence, do you agree that the transition has happened in terms of the natural resources economy?
Oh,
And
absolutely.
secondly,
Yeah.
what are the implications of it in terms of public policy? Do you think it's gone too far? Do you think it's the right direction, the wrong direction? What would you say?
Well, I think it's gone way too far, and let me qualify that by saying that at the time that we started in that direction, a lot of people could argue, and I might not disagree, that it was the right route to go because we were not an environmentally conscious state. In fact, we weren't an environmentally conscious country. I mean, if you think about it, it's been a revolution in thinking in just 30 years, maybe 40 years, but that's not very long. Of course, I'm getting older.
You too?
Yeah. But But did we go too far with environmental regulation? Well, that's a question that the legislature struggles with every time it comes to town. I mean, there's a lot of natural resource bills that get introduced every session, and they're all struggling with that precise question. How far do we need to go? How far should we go? How far do the citizens want us to go? Another way to put that question is, how clean is clean? You know, is clean 100%? You know, you've all got water on your tables, and you think that that is H2O, but it's not. Water that is H2O and absolutely nothing else exists only in a very sophisticated laboratory. The water coming down our streams and coming out your faucet is not 1,000% H2O. It's got all kinds of stuff in it. I mean, think about when you, especially if you have well water, which I do, but think about how often you have to run vinegar through your coffee pot just to get rid of the calcium deposits that came from what? Your drinking water. I mean, it's not pure H2O. And yet it meets, obviously, it meets the drinking water standards that have been set by the federal government and also by the state government, in some cases even stricter than the federal standards. So again, the question is, how clean does clean need to be? And that's a question that the legislature struggles with. That's a question that Congress struggles with. It seems to me that we sit on vast resources in this state. In fact, I once heard somebody give a talk and say that there is, geographically about the same size as Montana, there's only one place in the world that has more natural resources, and that's the country of Burma. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but I know that we have a lot of natural resources in this state. And I see no reason why we can't develop them in a responsible way. And responsible means responsible environmentally. It also means responsible in social ways, such as, you know, the good jobs. So yeah, I think it's gone too far, and I think that we are starting to recognize that, and we're starting to go back to that. I mean, the governor's talking about, you know, coal. There's more and more oil and gas development. There's some talk about mining, not much yet.
Pat, what would you say to that? We've gone too far.
Well, it depends on the resources, Lawrence knows, and other elements. I don't, you know, I hear a lot, we all do, as we should, about the marketplace. There are a lot of marketplaces. The marketplace of ideas, which the humanities deals with. There's the marketplace of goods and services. There's a marketplace of price for minerals and wood from our forests. And all those things have combined, along with America's reawakening about the environmental degradation that went on in the past. Now, did we overdo it some on some environmental laws? Well, I suppose we're all human, and we just write words and they become law. And so maybe some we underdid and some we overdid. So I don't deny there have been some mistakes, but I think we've taken a pretty good opportunity to try to right old wrongs. But getting back to the marketplace and to the marketplace of productivity and the marketplace of competition. My wife, Carol, who you know, did you get to see her? By the way? Did you tell me you saw her going up? Yeah, Carol. Carol didn't care enough about you and me to stay here and watch this.
I know. She told me that.
She's actually a very wise person.
Yeah. She had a date. I'm praying with another woman. Is there a rock band or something in town? Who's in town?
Women's filmmakers.
Oh, the Ludafest. Okay, well. Can't imagine that drawing Carol away from Lawrence Grossfield, but I guess it did. Carol's brother, his name was Bobby. Bobby's dead now, he died young. But Bobby worked in the Berkeley pit when the Anaconda Company laid off thousands of miners and closed the deep mines. Having zip to do with environmentalism, nothing. It had to do with competition, the world market of competition. And they opened that pit, and they hired Bobby, who was an extraordinarily good operator of heavy equipment, and he handled a shovel, and I was in it. I was at the bottom of the pit in those days. It wasn't as deep as it is now, and I climbed up the 12 steps or whatever it was to the cabin, and I stood in the bucket. I think that piece of equipment could have removed the Doubletree in 15 bites, 10 bites. And Bobby, not intentionally, but he put 300-400 miners out of work operating that shovel. Because the miners he put out of work used to operate with a shovel this big and a stick on the end of it, right? That was their shovel. So things changed in Montana, but a lot of it, I submit, was because of the marketplace of productivity. We also have that labor marketplace. We want most Americans want their fellow Americans to be well paid. Companies don't want that. They just don't want it. That's why they moved to Chile. Not only is the resource down there, the dollar an hour workers are down there. So they'd be damned if they're going to pay $9, $12 an hour in Butte when they can pay 90 cents in Chile. So they left. And so some of that, some of that, as Lawrence so well knows, is part of the effect in Montana. Just one more piece about that. I always maintain there are two kinds of environmentalists. One is Walden Pond, solitude, environmental sobriety, walking around, enjoying. The other kind of environmentalist is not Walden Pond, it's Berkeley Pit. I'm a Berkeley Pit environmentalist. I'm pissed. That's why I'm an environmentalist. They wrecked the joint. Lawrence is right. They didn't know. It was the template of the moment. It was the template of the time up to a point. Up to a point. Then they knew, but they went ahead anyhow. So there's good and bad in this treasure state of ours. So let me now hand it back to Brian, but close with this. I opened with Ori E. Plata on this question and calling ourselves a treasure state. What do we call ourselves now? The last best place. There's a transition for you, huh?
Yeah, let's talk about that. There's a couple of specifics, because right now I think we're talking more at a certain level where the disagreements may not be clear, and I think there are some disagreements certainly in the community and maybe reflected here. When Lawrence talks about reasonable use of environmental resources, it's hard for anybody to disagree with that statement. But it comes down to, please tell me if you disagree, the standards that Montana has in law for what you've got to do before you can open a mine or drill for oil or gas, in contrast, let's say, with Wyoming. And one of the arguments made by the pro-resources people is, look at Wyoming, they have many more jobs, blah, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, a much more vibrant industry. Now, when you were in the state legislature, you sponsored legislation to change the clean and healthful environment provision in the 1972 Constitution of the state of Montana, which places, as I recall, as a fundamental right, a clean and healthful environment. As a citizen, I looked at that and I said, that's a serious change. So it suggests something, since you're a serious guy, it suggests you felt there was a problem with that fundamental phrase and its implementation in law. Can you be specific about why you did it and what you think about that?
Well, yeah, actually I made more than one attempt to grapple with that issue. And really the way the issue, let me back up. Really what the issue amounted to was a separation of powers issue. And most people didn't understand that because most people just read the bill and thought, like in your case,
Most people like me
thought, oh my God. But it was a separation of powers issue. And what the deal was the Montana Supreme Court, from time to time, like I suppose most Supreme Courts, goes out on a limb and comes up with a decision that a lot of people question. And I'm not necessarily talking about people with a vested interest. I'm talking about, law professor type people. Look at it and say, how in the world could you do this? That was not a well-supported decision. And the issue was, had to do with the clean and healthful provision of the Constitution, which is Article 9, and I knew you were going to ask me something about this, so I brought it.
In summary.
Article 9, well, it's very brief, actually, and it says the state and everybody shall maintain a clean and healthful environment. And the next one says the legislature shall provide for the administration and enforcement of this duty. And the last one says the legislature shall provide adequate remedies for the protection and remedies to prevent unreasonable depletion. Which, I mean, just a plain reading of that says, well, it's up to the legislature to figure this out. In other words, to spell out the details behind this constitutional provision. And interestingly, and what one of my bills did, it didn't try and amend this provision, it tried to amend Article 2, which is the Declaration of Rights. And I think this is very important for people to think about. It's Article 2, Section 3, all people are born free and have certain inalienable rights. They include the right to a clean and healthful environment and the rights of pursuing life's basic necessities, enjoying and defending their lives in liberty, acquiring, possessing, and protecting property, and seeking their safety, health, and happiness in all lawful ways. And it doesn't say, you know, this one's more important than that one. They're all equally important. And what the court was doing was tending towards favoring one of those as opposed to the others. And what my bills tried to do in different ways was to say, you know, there's got to be balance. You've got to consider all of these, and there's got to be a balance.
Okay, and if I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but it could help correct me if I'm wrong. Your assessment was that the implementation of that standard was unnecessarily or excessively interfering with the development of natural resources. Is that a fair statement?
Well, yeah, it was tending in that direction.
Okay.
And, yeah.
Do you agree with that perspective, Pat? In other words, there's really kind of a fork in the road here that I'm seeing. Either the state over time emphasizes non-extractive, and I don't use that word in any way as a pejorative, just the utilization from the ground of natural resources, looks for other engines to drive the economy, versus the more traditional history. And we've made that shift, and I believe it's fair to say Lawrence feels we've gone too far. We're interfering with reasonable use of natural resources to the detriment of the welfare of the people. Is that fair, Lawrence? Roughly speaking?
Close enough.
Okay. Pat, do you agree or disagree, and why? And then we want to move on to another question.
Well, I think Lawrence really means it when he says, you know, close enough. He's, you know, political wonks watch other politicians. And so I know some of the senator's record. And he did not seem to me, and does not seem to me tonight. It's the first time Lawrence and I've had the pleasure of appearing with you, and I hope you with me.
It's a pleasure. In
Thank
fact,
you.
I've been looking forward to it.
Yeah, I have too, Lawrence. Lawrence,
Don't
as you
believe
can
any
tell,
of that,
is
don't believe any
yeah,
of
right, yeah, yeah. That's
That's
you
the
hear it in
boxing
the Senate,
coach
right?
talking.
Yeah, yeah. My good friend, and I really do mean he's my good. You hear that in the Senate debate all the time. I'm not quite sure what we're asking, although your question's very clear. But I agree that Montana had to step into a new era of environmental protection. I think we had to do that. I like the words in the Constitution, and I think I like them where they are, but I had never considered the matter before. Even though I knew your record, I hadn't considered whether this was placing the authority for that potentially in the wrong hands. That's an interesting thing. But if I'm going to fall down, if I have to fall down on one side or the other, I just decided when I was in the Congress, I wasn't a big environmentalist. I'm a moderate environmentalist, I guess. But I wasn't even that when I went to the Congress. I just started to look and see things and look more closely. And so I became a bit of an environmentalist when I was in the Congress. So ever since then, if I have to fall down on the side of more extraction or a better environment, I almost always fall down on the side of a better environment. That's just kind of how I came out.
Okay, let's talk about another aspect of this. We talked about population growth. I want to focus on the in-migration of wealthy, well-to-do relative to Montana, which is a very low-income state. Depending on which statistics you look at, we're 45th or 47th in per capita income. It's always a shock to read that. I think we're number one in the number of workers who hold 2 jobs in this state to earn a living. So we're a low-income state. We don't have that image. We have beautiful aesthetics, lovely landscapes. We've had a lot of in-migration of people with means who earned their living elsewhere and have moved to Montana. Ted Turner would be sort of the paradigm of that when he came into the state 20 years ago. What's your sense, each of you, for the public response to that, particularly among rural Montanans and blue-collar Montanans? What do they feel about it? How serious is it? Is it constructive or not in terms of the dynamic that that set off in this state? Pat?
Yeah. I think it's mixed. Montanans, like it seems to me some other Westerners have been, in my view, some Montanans have been a little too insular about accepting outsiders, whether they're wealthy outsiders or not. We've been a little uptight about it. On the other hand, gated communities. If you haven't read Bill Kittredge's, our pal Bill Kittredge's, our neighbor, right, your neighbor. If you haven't read his few essays on gated communities and what they do to a culture, an open culture like Montana, which, people say is one wide street all the way from Idaho to the Dakotas, people living on both sides. If you haven't read his stuff, you ought to do it. He makes a good case about why gated communities and residential fences can bust up this place in ways other than just the look of the landscape. Sometimes fences, as our rancher friend can tell you, are absolutely essential, but Bill's talking about a different thing. So I guess it seems to me that we need to be a welcoming place. We can't keep this state at 800 or 900. I suppose it'll top out 900 and some thousand people this year. We can't just keep it there. If we want to, we can't do it. The state's going to grow. The question is, how's it going to grow, and what will be, who will the new people be coming in? It doesn't seem to me that it's healthy for Montana to have a lot of residents in a few places who only live there part of the year. I think that's an unhealthy civic process. It creates an unhealthy civic process. My son and I like to play golf once in a while. The younger he seems to me, the less well I play, but we play golf once in a while, and we used to go down to Sun Valley. We don't go much anymore, but we used to make an annual trip to Sun Valley, and we were out playing in one of those nice golf courses down there, and I always knew there was something odd about playing in Sun Valley. And then one day I said to him, I know what it is. His name is Griff. He was just here with an art show. Some of you were there and saw his art and heard him, but he's from San Francisco now. I said, I know what it is, Griff. I know what's odd about this part of Idaho and these golf courses. He said, what? I said, listen. He said, I can't hear anything. I said, that's what's odd about it. There's nobody home. There's all these homes. Nobody lives here. There are no lawnmowers. There are no dog barking. There's nobody home. Well, hell, you can't have a state where there's nobody home. You can't have little towns where there's nobody home. So, it's that sort of thing, right?
What would you say about that, Lawrence, and particularly in terms of your experience as a rancher in the rural landscape where there's been a lot of this transition that's taken place?
Well, several things, I guess. One is people with means, in terms of buying rural property, whether it's a hobby ranch or just 20 acres where they can put a castle on the hill. What do they call them? Starter castles. There's been a lot of that, and one of the things that has done, among many others, is escalate the land values dramatically. And I don't mean just a little bit, I mean dramatically, many fold. In western Montana anyway, not quite so true in eastern Montana, but eastern Montana is affected too. So it's escalated the land values. Well, you might say, well, that's good for the ranchers because their land's worth a lot more. And I might say, well, yeah, that's true, at least until they die. And then Uncle Sam decides to look at estate taxes, or the heirs start to look at the estate taxes they're going to be stuck with. And basically, well, they got to sell the ranch in order to pay off the taxes or pay off the heirs or whatever. That's one very significant dynamic. Another is, I remember, I think it was when I was in the legislature, some guy, I don't remember where he was from, he bought a 10,000 acre ranch in Carbon County. And I think he went out on a tour of it with the county assessor, and I don't remember quite why. But anyway, he told the county assessor, he said, there'll never be another cow in this place. Well, you know, that was his dream, his American dream, and it's a bit hard to argue with that. But what he was really saying is that there won't be any cows, there goes that tax base. There won't be any need to raise any hay, so we don't need any machinery or fuel or parts. And you look around rural Montana, probably more to the eastern side, where there used to be implement dealers, there used to be several parts houses, they're gone. You know, hasn't been an implement dealer in Big Timber for, I can't remember, probably 20 years. And I mean, it has changed the economy. And then there's another thing that has changed, and that's the tax base. I mean, you don't have a tractor, you don't have to pay taxes on it. You don't have cows,
What's the
you don't have to pay
implication of that?
taxes
In
on
other
it.
words, we're talking about in all this whole context is, are we equipped for the 21st century? I'm hearing you say in a great swath of Montana, the agricultural economy is no longer employing as many people, generating as many tax dollars. What's your sense for the future of that culture, and also how it affects our ability to cope with the 21st century? It sounds like there's been this huge transition. Is it acknowledged by rural people? How do they feel about it?
Well, I think it has been acknowledged to some extent. One of the things that happens with some of the people, I mean, this guy that I described was an exception, but some of them come in and they buy the ranch and then they hire back the previous owner, or maybe the previous owner's son or daughter, as the ranch manager. And they do intend to keep cattle, and you know, they want to bring their friends out and show them that they're a cowboy. So there is still some hiring, there is still some machinery purchase and so on. I don't mean to say that you know, rural Montana is closed down, but there has been a big change. And one of the things that you asked about perceptions, one of the perceptions is that these people have closed off access. No hunting, no fishing. I mean, you can't get any place near the property. And some of them have hire patrols, I mean a patroller, to watch for that sort of thing. And there's some truth to all that. On the other hand, some of these people do get involved in the community. Some of them are very good about contributing to things like libraries or scholarship funds or you know, other local needs. And some of them do try to learn how the local people feel and kind of fit in. And some of them just flat don't give a damn. You know, I mean, they're going back to New York or Texas or California. So is there a resentment? I don't know. I think there was. I think people are more or less accepting now. The economies have changed some, and not only because of that. I mean, there's all kinds of reasons the economies have changed, as Pat was talking about when he was talking about the mining industry and the timber industry.
Economies change, that's obvious. I mean, that's just part of history. Cultures change in part as a result. If we're talking about Montana as it enters the 21st century and its preparedness for the 20th century, one might argue that a sense of broad social cohesiveness, shared values, and purpose is an important building block to that, whatever that future looks like. Now, I'm hearing part of what you said when you're going back to your first answer about people know more, but they're less tolerant. That sounds like a divided society. One might say traditional rural people seeing the change of the new landowners come in, one might say I mean, there is, in fact, there has been tension around that. Depending upon where that's going, that could also affect this sense of cohesiveness and sort of unity. We've got things to do together, whether it's public schools, or coming to some sort of agreement on how we're going to use natural resources, any number of issues that face our state. How do you both assess the state of the Montana citizenry in the sense of optimism, pessimism, sense of some sort of unifying purpose, or is it all NIMBY? What's in it for me? Then I'm going to ask you what the implication of that is for the future. Pat, what would you say to that?
Well, we hear on 24-hour news cycles that Americans are getting angrier and angrier, ruder and ruder, and meaner and meaner, right?
Yeah.
And there's some indication of that, at least there's pockets of it. I mean, when members of Congress are voting on whether one is for it or against it, voting on the most historic piece of legislation to pass since 1930s, and they get spit on the way to, and the black members of Congress get called, as it's now politely said, the N-word. They actually ought to use the real word, it's so startling. And when a president of the United States challenges for the first time a Supreme Court sitting in front of him and one of the judges mouths the words, "That's not true," and when a guy on the floor of the House of Representatives yells, "Baby killer," at Bart Stupak, who's the primary anti-abortion member of the House, and when a fellow yells at the President of the United States, "You lie," then I suppose it's gotten past just a few islands of angry people. I think maybe it's gotten into the mainstream of the culture. It's infected us somehow. In Montana and elsewhere, we've never had a lack of bare-knuckled politics and policy in Montana. And there have been times in northern Idaho and particularly in parts of eastern Montana and parts of northwestern Montana where people have not only become mean and angry but dangerous. Tim McVeigh, the guy that blew up the Oklahoma City building, killed parents, federal employees, and their children across the street in daycare, used to hang out in northwestern Montana and northern Idaho. So they're dangerous. And I think they're dangerous in more than a physical way. I think they're dangerous at a time when Montana and the United States faces some of the greatest challenges any people in this country have faced. Regardless of what's causing climate change, regardless of what's causing it, we've got to work together to get it fixed. Regardless of exactly what we think about trying to repair the undeniable mess in healthcare insurance delivery in America, we've got to work together to get it fixed. China, if we don't work together, if we don't give our politicians running room, China's going to eat our lunch. We're going to be running a very poor second here in about 20 years. If senior citizens don't give their politicians some running room, this country's, for real this time, going to go flat broke. We got to pull it together a little bit. We got to be a little less angry with each other, and I urge you all not to join the Tea Party. And if another group on the left, if another group on the left springs up the way it did in the 1960s in America, I urge you to stay away from them too. And I'll urge you to do one other thing. Write Rachel Maddow, Ed Schultz, Rush Limbaugh, and Sean Hannity and ask them to shut the hell up.
So let's take a look at that dynamic. I want to ask you. I want to ask you about that. In other words, that's a national phenomenon. What's your sense for the environment in Montana? Because we're part of the United States. Is that having a significant impact on changing what you articulated earlier, that Montana has had a history, let's say, of more tolerance, even though they had very different points of view? I found it a pretty civil place. What would you say about that? How significant is that in terms of its impact on Montana, specifically among the citizens? And then I want to talk about the legislature, the Montana legislature as a vehicle for coming together or not.
Well, first let me say that I absolutely agree with every word you just said. Just right every single thing, except that I would have added a few more names to your last list. But, I mean, I can't stand to listen to any of those bastards. But
I'm with you.
I think, you know, you were talking from a national perspective, and I think about that from the Montana perspective. And I think that part of what happens, and I think you're right, Brian, we are more tolerant than maybe, well, certainly than people inside the Beltway. But I have to fault the news media to some extent for paying way too much attention to all that kind of garbage and not paying attention to good or maybe better principles of citizenship or principles of government. You know, I don't think, with the exception of, what was it, the legislative session before the last one,
Right.
I don't think that there's been the kind of rancor in Montana that we've seen in D.C. But I do think that it you know, it rubs off on us. And maybe that's what happened during that session. It was a little bit better, well, quite a bit better during the last session. But hearing and watching all that bashing, I mean, you've got the Republican Party and the Democrat Party, they've both hired, nationally now I'm talking, they've both hired these political strategists that are very aggressive and teach people to be very partisan. And I think that's too bad. I think that's too bad, because what it should be about is good government and figuring out, as you say, the answers to some of these difficult questions in concert as representatives of the people, and let's do it together type of thing.
Let me ask you your experience. You're a state senator, you had extensive experience in the legislature. It's a part-time legislature, meets every 2 years, and now it's term limited. We face the same problems as a state as every state in the United States. We're in the 21st century. This is complicated stuff. Do you feel that institutional structure is up to the challenges we face? Some people say it's...
How much time have I got?
You got 30 seconds to answer that one, yes or no. No, but seriously, some people say this is amateur hour faced with professional caliber problems.
A lot of people say that, and I guess I would say that I'm not too bothered by having biennial sessions. I'm not sure 90 days is quite long enough, but I'm not too bothered by having annual sessions in a small population state like Montana, where we have a large legislature, really, 150 people. I mean, that's way more than the California legislature is. I forget what it is, but I think the total is right around 100. And here we are with 150. Although we got a lot of miles to cover. But you know, there is one reform I would like to see, and that would be to have a special budget session. And I don't know if you want to get into that or not. It might take some time, so I won't go there unless somebody wants to ask me about it.
We'll see if people want to ask about that, but we'll do that.
But the term limits thing is, I think, a wreck. I think it's a terrible thing that was passed. I think it's a terrible thing to keep. I also think it's something that we're stuck with. What term limits does is it destroys institutional memory, for one thing, because you got nobody there. I remember when I was a freshman legislature, and I went over and I thought I had a great idea, and I talked to some of the old guys about it, guys that had been there a while. And they said, well, you know, it's not a bad idea, but they tried that 5 years ago, and here's what they're really up to. And I thought, oh my God, I've never thought of that. Well, you've lost that. You've lost that institutional memory. Another thing you've lost, I believe, is diplomacy. You know, diplomacy is not something that you inherit. It's not something in your genes, something that you're born with. It's something that you learn. And it takes a while to learn it. And you got to be around diplomats in order to even think about it, let alone learn very much about it. Statesmanship, diplomacy. Well, term limits got rid of all the statesmen. I remember most of the time that I was in the Senate, Senator Chet Blaylock from Laurel was a very liberal, very principled Democrat from Laurel. And everybody respected him. Everybody, I mean, he and I disagreed a lot because he was very liberal. But I respected him every moment of every day. And people referred to him as the conscience of the Senate. And he was in a lot of ways. And now I ask you, who is the conscience of the Senate or of the House? Or is that a topic that's even thought about? People are not there. Government is complex, let me tell you. Even our little $7 billion state government, little, $7 billion, I mean, can't imagine that. But it's extremely complex, and it's not the kind of thing you learn in your first 90 days. I mean, hell, it takes longer than that to learn where all the bathrooms are in the Capitol. Government is very complex, and you've got, term limits is just, it's just a wreck because you've lost statesmanship. Another thing that you've done is think about who's there all the time. Who is there now for the 18, 20 years instead of some of the legislators? And the answer is the lobbyists and the bureaucrats. Now, you know, a lot of people don't like lobbyists. I'm a defender of lobbyists to a large extent, not totally. But the bureaucrats, and what is the tendency of any bureaucracy? I don't care if it's a state government, city government, a corporation, a U.S. government, whatever. To grow, right? To grow. To come up with a bigger budget next year. And when you have a legislature that doesn't understand very much about how all that works, we are destined for bigger budgets, and we are destined to tip the balance of power greatly towards the executive branch. And I don't think that's good.
Let me ask you one question before we go to the audience. The other aspect of the political process is the citizenry that elects folks. And last night we spent a lot of time talking about the state of the American citizenry, and Pat's highlighted some of the issues we talked about, the inflammatory news media and the polarization of the American public, which is played out around health care. What's your sense, both of you, and I'll start with Pat, for the state of the citizenry in Montana? Acceptance of the responsibility to be informed, have opinions, and also specifically to come together as opposed to one set, you know, the environmental groups meeting together, talking with each other, the stockholders talking with each other, the loggers talking with each other, and never focusing on their shared values and common goals. Where are we in this state in terms of citizen attitudes?
We're fragmented by various groups, all of which have a purpose, and most of those purpose in the minds of their members is an excellent purpose. I'm like Lawrence, I think I defend lobbyists some because they're your representatives. Students at the University of Montana have lobbyists in Washington, D.C. working on their behalf. They don't know it, but they have lobbyists. Get them guaranteed student loans and so on. That leads to a little fragmentation. Many of the membership groups, be it on the right or left, on the industry side or the environmental side, though, have created a lot of fragmentation of Montana's, political civility and political understanding over the past years. None of them trying to do it. I don't think they're purposely trying to misinform Montanans. It's just that, you know, they're dealing from a different set of facts, and they're dealing from what persuades them. And as a result, we've become a people who don't know the truth anymore, right? Including me. I mean, what the hell is the truth anymore? You see all these facts out there by people presenting them to you. In short, it does seem to me that Montana is suffering from what all states are suffering from, and that is a balkanization of opinion regarding public policy. We are balkanized. And while there's some good in that, some obvious good in opinion and having people out there trying to deliver to you the facts, it seems to me that so many of those groups are so insistent and so angry and in such need of new membership that they sometimes inflate the danger, you know what I mean, that it's not good for us as a people trying to reach a solution, trying to give our representatives running room. So let me make a prediction. I think politicians never make predictions, but I guess I'm not a politician anymore, so I can do it. I can now be wrong without worrying about it, in other words. I think we've seen the high point in that balkanization. I personally think that Americans, maybe not over the long pull, but for the near term, 20 years, are going to start coming together. I think we've had it with the rabble-rousers, and that we're going to start pulling together. We'll see. I sure hope so.
Lawrence, what's your sense for that?
Well, I'm not sure I'm quite as optimistic. I am as optimistic regarding Montana. I'm not sure about
Yeah, let's talk about Montana.
regarding the country. Actually, I see in Montana a shift, I think, that's already begun and has actually been going on quietly, I would say, for several years. We were talking at dinner tonight about the Big Hole Watershed Committee. Now, there's a group of redneck ranchers and what should we call them?
Green Neck Environmental.
Okay, Green Neck. I was searching for a little more.
I knew you were, that's why I jumped in.
That have been working together to try and they've done a lot of very constructive things in the Big Hole Water Basin, trying to deal with the water issues there. In Sweetgrass County, perhaps the most conservative county in the state, or at least at one time it was, which is where I live, we now have we have two watershed groups. One is just starting up, and it happens to involve the streams that I live on. And we're meeting, we're talking, we've got some grant money to, look at the stream and recommend improvements. We're talking to Trout Unlimited, and, 20 years ago, I mean, forget it.
Right.
And it's not just watershed type committees, it's other committees that are working in communities around the state, trying to get people to come together. So I think that some of that has started, and like I said, I have more optimism, I think, for Montana than nationally. Just kind of in that context, I do want to make just a little follow-up to my previous diatribe, having to do with the I don't know, the partisanship type stuff, the Rush Limbaugh type stuff, the what's the guy's name on MSNBC?
Ed Schultz? I don't know.
Keith Olbermann.
Yeah.
Did you see him the other night, his first night back?
Out of prison, was it?
I don't know, back from, I think it was some family tragedy or something. I'm not really sure what it was, but he was as bad or worse than I've ever seen Rush Limbaugh, on the opposite side. But anyway, I really think that the press ought to be held to a higher standard. And I think, now that's a tough a tough campaign to go on nationally. But I don't think it would be that tough in Montana. I mean, we have chosen to live here, and it's not that big a state, population-wise. I mean, we can do better. We can insist on better, it seems to me, from our press. And I think that would go a long ways to help the kind of thing that we're talking about.
Interesting.
Although I would like to add that I think our press is better than the press you and I are primarily complaining about. I think the press
agree.
in Montana is much better than
Yeah, I agree.
Although not as good as it should be anymore either. The newspapers,
Well, maybe I shouldn't say
Tom
the
knows,
press.
newspapers aren't quite as good as
Maybe I should say the editors, because they're feeding all this national diatribe to all our daily newspapers.
On that note, let's see what you'd like to say. So what we'd like to do is we'll have questions, comments, and to keep it moving, if you can just kind of, while one person is asking their question or making their statement, just raise your hand, and then when the question's finished, I'll wander over there. This is a sensitive mic, and I have to be careful about making bad noises with it.
Okay.
I'll hold it.
Okay. I'm John Porterfield from Whitefish. Thank you again for coming together. My question would be related to the youth of Montana. We lead the nation in the highest rate of suicide the highest rate of teen meth use, other things like the least number of two-year graduates, places like the community of Troy where about 75% of the kids don't go on to higher education. I think statewide the average is about 50%. We graduate about 7,000 students a year across Montana, so that means about 3,500 aren't going on to get the basic skills that society needs. And what are your thoughts about what we can do about it?
Great question.
The Montana is, I mentioned earlier some of these myths we live with. One of the myths is how wonderful we are as a state and as parents to our kids. Well, it's not what the statistics show. It's just not. Now, does that mean we aren't good parents? Hell, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know what it means. But I do know that Montana ranks at the bottom in number of children who receive inoculation for major childhood disease. At the bottom. At the bottom. Mississippi second to the bottom, right? Now, education's been my passion. So very quickly, let me say this. Over here, across the Clark Fork River, Lawrence on the campus. The top students are better than they've ever been, and there are more of them. And every teacher, Harry, every teacher will tell you that. And they are smarter than we are. I mean, they're really good. The middle kids are worse than they ever were and are filling up that huge surplus of poor kids at the bottom of our student body. Now, think about what that means if we continue that over, what, the next 5 graduating classes? You're going to have one class of Americans that know a lot and earn a lot and are the leaders, and this huge other class of America that doesn't get it.
Lawrence?
Well, and you didn't even include what was your number, 7,500?
Yeah, about 7,500.
So 3,750 do not go on to college, and they're not even included in that.
Exactly.
It sounds to me like a challenge for the Montana educational system, and perhaps more for, and again, back to the press. I mean, the press could do an awful lot towards teaching responsible citizenship if they had a challenge, had an offer they couldn't refuse.
I just want to say on that point, it's a very interesting concept, the concept that people in Montana with the human scale of our institutions could influence press coverage, and it's something that I think would be worth following up a conversation about, because obviously you've thought about this, and I think it's a very interesting concept. Didn't mean to interrupt your answer.
Well, let me just say that I think that the K-12 system could do an awful lot to help. And, you know, not that the K-12 system in Montana is terrible, but I think it could be a lot better. There's a lot of resistance from segments within the K-12 educational system to change. A lot of resistance to change towards just about anything. Distance learning, for example. Well, don't want to do that because that means hiring less teachers. There's a lot of things that the K-12 system could do which would help in all of this.
Sir.
I'd like to bring up and ask you to comment on the evolution in Montana's gun culture. When we first came here, my wife and I, about 40 years ago, we had people like Mansfield who could talk about that and bring people together. Now, we have Gary Marbut, we have an increase in extremism. Up the Bitterroot, we have people parading around with their guns. We have laws passed in the last legislative session that is encouraging people not to call the police, but to approach anybody who they think might be threatening and point out, I have a gun. Intimidating, in other words. That's one side of it. And to the rest of the country, Montana looks like an extreme gun gone wild kind of place. But there's another side too. There are a lot of people in this state, for example, who are most upset about guns in the national park, or upset about the return of the militias, or all of the things that are going on. Those people have mostly been quiet, but they won't be, I think. They're beginning to speak out. And the big thing is this division that is becoming more extreme. How are we going to get out of that? Where are we going?
Lawrence, you want to take that on for openers? Nice,
Well,
easy question.
That's a tough one. There are a few activists around the state, Gary Marbut being one of them, but there are others, who are just driven. I mean, it's almost a religious thing with them. And Gary Marbut and several others came to the I was chairman of the Judiciary Committee. Well, I was on Judiciary Committee my whole time in the legislature, and that's where all these kinds of bills came, the gun-type bills. So, you know, I got to meet a lot of, is Gary here? I got to meet a lot of wackos, I really did. And I will say this about Gary, that Brian, you will probably shake his hand for this. You know, earlier I talked about trying to amend we had that little discussion about trying to amend the clean and healthful stuff. Gary Marbut actually was an opponent to my bill, so you should shake his hand. It was actually because he doesn't want anybody messing with the Constitution under any circumstances for anything, because, you know, he's afraid that there'll be a runaway. I don't know. I mean, I'm disturbed about that. My representative, actually, in the last legislative session, brought up a bill that I thought you were going to talk about, which I can't remember exactly what it was. Something about if you manufacture ammunition, was it, or guns?
Guns or ammunition, the state of
Guns
Montana,
or
you're exempt from federal law.
Yeah, something like that. And, you know, I mean, that the whole reason for that was to prompt a lawsuit in federal court. Well, you know, I mean, I spent enough time on Judiciary Committee not to have time for that kind of stuff, because we got too many other important things to worry about. By the way, current Senator John Esp, who's the guy that replaced me, is challenging that guy in the primary in Park in Sweetgrass County, just for whatever that's worth. I don't know how you do that. I mean, we do have a very strong gun tradition in this state, going back to hunting, I think, a lot more than self-protection. But I think it really goes back to what we've talked about quite a bit here tonight, and that is this just vitriolic attitude that people have toward each other. And yeah, okay, let's bring out the gun. I mean, I don't know how you affect that directly. Maybe, Pat, you've got a better idea.
Well, I don't know if it's any better. Lawrence, to the dismay of probably many of the people in this room, and my constituency in Missoula, to their dismay, I had a 100% voting record for 18 years with the NRA.
Well, so did I. Not for that long, but I did,
I
too.
didn't know I had it. They gave me an award or something. I said, what the hell is this for? They said, well, you're the only guy, you got 100%. Okay. My thing was this. I mean, just quickly to defend that. I used to have to defend it. I don't think putting people's name on a list will stop crime. I just don't think it has anything to do with it. And I knew a lot of big city members of Congress who didn't want to face crime. They didn't want to improve Head Start. They didn't want to have more police on the streets. They didn't want to do the kind of thing, but they would vote for gun control and then walk away and say, well, there, I took care of my crime problem. No, they didn't. Hell, we've got gun control, hell won't have it, and we got crime till hell won't have it. And both are going up exponentially. So I never was sure that stuff worked. Now, I may have been wrong, I may have been right, but that's my story, as they say, and I'm sticking with it. Mike Mansfield was against gun control almost his entire career. And then in the 1960s, a Marine, we had already had those tragic assassinations, but a Marine walked out of a little hamburger stand in Georgetown outside of Washington, D.C. with his uniform on, and a fellow walked up to him and said, give me that bag of burgers. And the Marine said, hell no. And the guy pulled out a gun and said, and give me your wallet. And the Marine, who was a Montanan, said, go to hell. And the guy shot him right there. Dropped him, killed him. And Mansfield said, that's it. 77% of Montanans were in favor of gun control. Opposed to gun control. 77%, and it had stayed that way for a long time, but 77% it topped out at about in most reasonable polls. Mike said he was running the next time. That November he said, I don't care. We're overboard now. And Mike Mansfield passed gun control through the Congress, a Montanan. Like the Brady Bill and so on and so, started it, and then the Brady Bill came out of it and so on and so forth. Now the last poll I saw, although it was, 10, 12 years ago, 58% of Montanans supported the Brady Bill. Supported gun control, 58%. Well then who are the people with the guns on their hips? Parading around with the shotguns over their shoulder and wanting to be able to put, they're a tiny, tiny minority of Montanans who are out of the mainstream. They're not our hunting and fishing culture, although they themselves may hunt and fish. They are the government haters who have been telling us for years the government's going to take your gun. The government protects your guns. The government protects your property. It doesn't take it. And so it seems to me that we ought not be either persuaded or fearful of some of these louts who want to parade in public with a gun or come up with all of these tricks. Lawrence mentioned one of them that was simply for the purpose of getting the Supreme Court to open up the gun control loopholes any farther. And I'll say one thing more. The NRA is no longer an organization about protecting people's rights on guns. It's become a conservative political organization and give money to candidates. Montana is not. Montana, it's a shame that Montana is that some people in Montana, it's a shame that we have to be embarrassed about the way we feel about guns. Most of us have guns. We lock them up. We use them responsibly. They're a sport for us. They're hunting, and they're target practice, and they're fishing. They're like a baseball bat for us, which is a sport in baseball. That's how guns are. And the people that use them otherwise, including making Montana the most dangerous state in America with regard to gun injuries and gun deaths, those people are not the majority in Montana, and we really ought not to let the national press believe they are the majority.
Well said, well said. I would ask you, though, do you really fish with a gun?
Hey, he's from Butte. I told you, Lawrence, you wouldn't believe some of this stuff.
Yeah, Lawrence, how do you do it?
Ma'am?
This goes way back to where the conversation started, or near to where it started, on a very different topic. You mentioned, Lawrence, that the what's underneath the ground and talking about extractive industries. And I wonder, as we're looking towards the 21st century, if the conversation in the rural areas is moving more towards what's above the ground and the renewable energies and solar and wind and what Montana has such a wealth of. And are people starting to think of that as being part of our resource instead of the natural resources under but above? And there was a great Helena Independent Record editorial, I think today or yesterday, about energy efficiency being half of our energy needs, that we could meet with that, and those are jobs that can't be outsourced and sent to China and things. And I guess I just wonder if that's part of the discourse that you see, or part of the solution to our natural resources battles that we have.
Well, I certainly see it as part of the solution. I think I mentioned that. If I didn't, I meant to. I think, we've got tremendous wind resource in this state. We've got a sun resource. We've got biomass resource. We should be going after all of that. But I'll tell you, it comes back to the NIMBY thing. I mean, in Sweetgrass County now, we've got 2 different wind projects that are in the works. Parts of, I'm not up to speed on exactly where they're at, but parts of their permit applications have been approved by the state and by the county commissioners and whatever. And we've got an awful lot of people who say, we don't want those damn wind turbines up there. They look ugly, and then we're not going to be able to see the crazy mountains. I mean, so that's theoretically environmentally friendly. I mean, I don't think you can run our electrical grid off of wind energy. You've got to have a backup when the wind's not blowing, but it can sure be a significant part of it. But we get back to the NIMBY thing. And that's something that, I mean, I don't understand. I don't know, maybe it's selfish. I guess it is kind of selfish. But if people would think about, you know, if we are, let's just take the example of driving your car, and you've got a certain percentage of the gasoline that's in that car. I don't know how much. It's not a lot anymore, I don't think. But you've got a certain percentage of the gas that came from countries that aren't very friendly to us, or that came from countries that don't see civilization like we do, countries that have recently been involved in genocide within their own borders. I mean, you know, why would anybody not want to develop what oil and gas we have here and do it environmentally responsibly? Oh, the other thing is, we don't do it here, it gets done in places that don't have the kind of environmental laws that we do have here. And if they need to be stronger, fine, convince the legislature, which means a majority of the representatives of the people, and they get stronger and stronger. But we still have to deal with this whole NIMBY thing, and I'm not sure exactly how to get at it, but somehow we got to get at it. In fact, I think I've long thought that would be a great topic for a major symposium someplace in Montana, this whole NIMBY syndrome thing.
Pat, you want to say anything to that?
Well, just this, and I think maybe Lawrence and I would agree on this. I'm for alternative energy too, and Montana has got a lot of wind, but you don't have to be a strong environmentalist to believe this, Lawrence, and I know a lot of ranchers, including I'm sure you, who appreciate the scenery. In Montana, it's not just, you know, nice to have the scenery, it's a cash register. It's a cash register. Whenever it's possible, to not place these enormous turbines where they block beautiful views. I'd rather not see turbines on the Rocky Mountain front. I don't want to see them out there. Now, do I want turbines in Montana? Yeah, sure. And I think there are places for them, but I think we have to be careful where we put them. I recognize there are certain wind corridors, and if you don't put them there, you don't pick it up. But I guess I'll just say it this way. You know, probably at the end, what we might have left in Montana is the horizon. And I don't want to see it busted up.
Sir?
My name's Chuck Broughton, and I'm one of those people both of you gentlemen talked about when you started. I came here 21 years ago and adopted this wonderful state. I was really distressed when they decided to deregulate a public utility. I come from a state that did that over 50 years ago, and I begged politicians on both sides of the spectrum to look into the history of what happened. That state became almost, a civil war almost erupted. And it took 5 or 6 years for the Supreme Court to find the law that was passed there not constitutional. And I just was really distressed to see something be destroyed the way it was.
Any comments on that, deregulation, either of the utilities or more broadly, the question?
Well,
Excuse me.
America went through a great glut after Reagan of deregulation. You know, I mean, Reagan got elected on government is the problem, deregulation's the problem, unfunded mandates, and so on and so forth. It became part of our vocabulary.
The state Reagan came from is the one I was speaking
Yeah,
Illinois.
There you go. Some deregulation worked, some didn't. I used to pretty much, when I had a chance at the federal level, vote against deregulation. My theory, just quickly, is this. I think banks ought to be banks, and insurance companies ought to be insurance companies. I think big banks ought to be big banks, and little banks ought to stay little, and they shouldn't allow the big guys to eat them. It seems to me that power companies ought to continue to be power companies and not worry about cell phones. Yeah. So I like firewalls. Now, in some way, that's sort of anti-capitalistic. I understand that. But capitalism runs amok in deregulation, as we've seen in the last couple of years. I don't know how much you all lost in your investments, but I'm starting to walk with a limp.
Lawrence? Want to add to that?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I agree with what you said, that there was a big anti-regulation or deregulation movement that we went through for, well, to some extent, we might still be going through it, although we're sure interested in regulating the, one of the institutions you mentioned, the big banks and whatever. You know, you got to ask yourself, too big to fail, what does that really mean, and is that really good? I don't know. I guess I would just say, repeat what you said, and that is that some of it worked and some of it didn't.
Sir?
I think most of it didn't, personally.
Tate Jones of Missoula. I hear in tonight's discussion a lot of nostalgia for the era of Eisenhower, Mansfield, and Walter Cronkite. Yet, the world of our grandparents' youth was one of a highly partisan press, highly charged level of political agitation, violent at times, and strict party line adherence. And I'm sure that Senator Grossfeld has ancestral memories of agrarian populists in central Montana, and Congressman Williams that of labor violence in Butte. Comment on a possible alternative 21st century Montana, that is that we're not as, and nation for that matter, that is we're not as mature a political culture as we like to think we are, and what we're returning is to the default setting of American political life.
Mm-hmm. Good.
Who's up for that?
Would you repeat the question? The question was so damn good, I want to hear it again. You want me to try? You want to go?
Nostalgia for the great old days that never were.
Yeah, I served in the legislature with a great, in the House back in the 60s, Lawrence, with a great newsman named Miles Romney. Some of you remember Miles from, he and his dad ran the Western News in, down the way here in Hamilton. And I remember Miles stood up one time, you know, he took the mic out of the desk in the House chamber and he said, "I'm not the man I used to be." Come to think of it, I don't think I ever was. That's sort of how American history is. We pine for those good old days. I'm not sure there were a lot of good old days. I do think that speaking of Walter Cronkite, I do think that the 24 news hour cycle requires the press to come up with the latest problem and turn it into a big headline, because they got to put ads around it. You know, they got to sell time around it. So reports coming up, President Obama has gone to the White House bathroom, more later, you know, but so I think that's worse. I think the news, not because of newspapers, although the revenue problem is difficulty for them, but because of the 24-hour news cycle, we don't have it, that's not as good as it used to be. I personally think that until recently, politics had gotten a lot better than they were in early America. Corruption was less. There was more time spent by serious members of Congress trying to think things through over the past 30 years than I believe there had been previously. And as I said, but I want to emphasize, it was a lot less corrupt now. Now, some people would say, oh, that's only because you decriminalized the corruption. And there's that legitimate point can be made. I'll stop there and let Lauren.
Well, I don't know that, I guess I hadn't quite thought of our discussion that way, that we were wishing for the good old times. I do think that some of the changes that we've made, and I talked quite a bit about term limits, that's one example, that I think was a mistake. But, you know, mistakes are made in politics. Mistakes are made in government by Congress, by legislatures, whatever. And hopefully, well, and usually, a lot of those mistakes get fixed when they're discovered. Something like term limits is a whole nother challenge. I'm not sure we can fix that one. But, you know, I look forward to a broadening economy, a technological economy, and it's growing. I mean, Bozeman, and I'm sure here too, are hotbeds of internet business and all that sort of thing. And I think that we have a great potential. Of course, that's going to mean more population coming to Montana, and some people like that and some don't. Right now, we've got a lot of vacant houses. We'd probably use a few more people.
Sir. Yes, my name is Wynn Smith. I'm from Ravalli County. I genuinely appreciate your years of experience in the legislature. And we now know that we no longer are evaluating distance between towns. We're evaluating in miles instead of how many beers you drink. I would like to know what we do to change the legislature immediately so we don't have drunk drivers on our highways any longer. We mostly are aware of the fact that we are the worst state in the nation for drunk drivers and deaths, but we exceed the national average by more than twice. We've listened to the renegades too long in this state. We need to start listening to the silent majority. What do we do to change the legislator?
Well, that's, and I don't disagree with anything you said. I can tell you one experience that I had, which kind of goes to your question. One of the last, I think it was one of the last bills I carried, I don't know, I think it was probably in my last session, I don't remember for sure, but was to establish the 6-month treatment program that's now located in Warm Springs, for men anyway, and it's in eastern Montana for women. A very intensive treatment center. I mean, prior to that, somebody go to prison and they'd go to an AA meeting once a week in prison. I mean, what's that going to do? This is an intensive 6-month program. And if I remember right, it was for, I think it was for people with more than 4 DUI convictions. And when I presented the bill to the House committee, I got railed at, because why wait till more than 4? Why not put it at like 2? Well, the answer is unfortunate, but it's also fairly simple at that point in time. At greater than 4, it cost, I forget the number, let's just say it cost $20 million. If you went down to 3, it would have cost $100 million. If you went down to 2, it would have cost $500 million. I mean, it's a simple matter of economics. Now, I know there's been an awful lot in the press lately, all over the state, not just here, about this issue, because there are, I mean, it's ridiculous to read a thing in the paper that says somebody, you know, they've already had 10 convictions and they're still, I mean, there's something radically wrong there. And yeah, maybe treatment doesn't work for everybody. Maybe, I don't know, maybe they need to treat them like sex offenders. I mean, sex offenders have a lot tougher road. But I can just tell you that I don't think a little bit of treatment helps all that much. It's got to be very intense, and then it might help, but that's not cheap.
Pat, anything you want to add to that?
Well, just that it seems to me that we have to recognize who's the most addicted in Montana. State government to the revenue that comes from booze. That's the real addiction. Now, I don't know what we do about that. You want to pay more taxes? We'll stop it on beer and wine, then everybody gets it, you know, at a cheaper price, and you have to pay more taxes. So I don't know what you do about that part. With regard to the DUIs, it seems to me that we've got to be reasonable people. If we're going to advertise booze and the state's going to be addicted on it and it's part of the Montana culture, then it seems to me we have to say, well, okay, person gets picked up for the first time and they're a little bit drunk. You can have a couple of drinks and be over the limit, you know, so they're a little bit drunk. Well, you kind of lighten up on them and you give them a fine. And then if you catch them again within whatever it is, 6 months or 12 months, the fine's a little heavier. And then after that, it's the slammer. And after that, you lose your car for life. We got to start hammering the people that really, really do it. But I think we got to lighten up a little bit, particularly as a public pile-on thing, to the guy who had 2 glasses too many of wine at a neighbor's house and was driving the 3 blocks to his house and got picked up twice in a 2-year period. I think you lighten up on that guy and you beat the bejesus out of the real offenders.
I appreciate that particularly because I'm looking forward to having that drink, Pat, at the last question.
Bill Thackeray from Havre. Political phenomena is occurring in North Montana that may be affecting the rest of the state, and it partly derives from the term limit. We have a group that are taking their lead from Liberty University, graduates of Liberty University in political science, who have decided that they will put up a candidate for every vacancy that occurs as a result of term limits. And they've been electing candidates on 2 issues only, which is anti-abortion and anti-gay rights. And these candidates simply start at the beginning of the election season and harangue on anti-abortion and harangue on anti-gay rights, and they are winning elections up there. I mean, they've won 1, and they're probably going for 2 this time.
Question?
The question is this a phenomenon that's occurring across the state? Are we seeing a recurrence of a real right-wing resurgence in Montana politics?
I don't know. I hadn't heard that they were filling. I don't know about the Liberty College thing. I hadn't heard though that there was an organized movement to fill all these seats. I do know that that the term limit movement came with part of this 30 years of denigrating government. You know, we've had 30 years now of denigrating government. Government's going to take your guns. No, they aren't. Social Security's gone broke. No, it hadn't. I mean, it's a shock to everybody, I know, but it hasn't, and we can stay around. I'll tell you why it hasn't. It's not broke. And all these things. And so what did we have to do? Well, we had to stop these insane elected people by limiting them to 2 terms. Look at all this crazy stuff they'd done. No, they hadn't. They just had not. They were public servants like Lawrence and Bob Brown. The vast majority of them were good people. If their constituents decided they wanted to keep them around for 3 or 4 or 5 terms, they should have been allowed to do that. But it's part of the denigration of government, right? The government's no good, so if you keep rolling over the members of it, you'll have better government. No, you'll have worse government, and that's what we have in state legislatures after state legislatures. Some of the people that get elected to state legislatures now, in my opinion, because of term limits, are nearly, this a very small handful, are nearly incompetent. Policy-wise, intellectually, they're almost incompetent. And term limits and anti-government cause that.
Yeah, I guess I would agree that Lawrence and Bob were pretty good legislators, but I think Harry was all right, too.
Yeah. Yeah, well, Harry's hard to see. I didn't see him back there. I forgot about him.
I have a little bit different, well, not much different, but a little bit different take on term limits. Term limits, people, partly because of, I suppose, news media, television, we live in a soundbite world, okay? Soundbites sell. I mean, they just do. And term limits, that's why we have it. Throw the bums out. Remember CI-75? Have a say in what you pay. You know? I mean, who disagrees with that? So it became a initiative, and it passed. It actually passed, meaning that you vote on everybody votes on every single little fee increase that comes along. Every single one. Hundreds of thousands of them, I would say, over a 5-year period. But have a say in what you pay. I mean, who's going to argue with that? Or, you see the signs around saying, pay taxes on election day. Well, you know, yeah, that would straighten them out, wouldn't it? People yearn for simple answers to complex questions, and they refuse to accept or to think long enough to realize that there are not simple answers to complex questions. There just aren't. Now, you know, I'm not sure what exactly is going on up in northern Montana, but I can tell you that there is a concerted effort. There has been, filing deadline has passed now, but there has been a concerted effort on the part of I don't know how to describe it, I suppose Tea Party type people, at least in south central Montana, to be sure that all seats have, you know, one of their candidates in it. I don't know if that's a statewide phenomenon or not. And I don't know, I mean, you said you questioned the sort of competence of some of these people, and term limits means they aren't going to be there long enough to learn very much anyway. But you know, when it comes down to it in the final analysis, it's the voters that picked them. And theoretically, any representative represents the district because he or she sure got elected by a majority, unless it's the only person on the ticket. So why don't you run?
Right.
Which is just another way of saying that people ought to get more involved, you know? I mean, yeah, being in the legislature costs you some time, but I'll tell you, the education you get is incredible.
There's an old saying in the Congress, when you first get there, you have this in mind. I wonder how a dope like me ever got here with all these wonderful people. And then after your second term, it becomes, how in the hell did these dopes all get here with a smart guy like me?
Well, man, people being people and wanting simple answers to complicated questions raises the last question I want to ask you to. If you look down the road 20, 25 years, where do you think Montana's going to be, given that our people are normal people and they do like simple answers to complicated questions? Where are we going to be and why? What are the factors that are going to influence where we're going to be? Don't both jump in at once. It's hard to...
Well, I guess I really think that we will do more in the way of responsible natural resource development. I think we'll do more in the way of alternative energy development in this state. I think we are realizing that we need not only the jobs but the tax base, the tax revenue. You know, we've talked a lot about schools and all the things that we need. I mean, all the infrastructure that we need out there. I think that we will continue to work together more, whether it's urban-rural or whether it's conservative-liberal or whatever it is. I think we are finding some value in working together. And like I said, I think that started a while back. I think, I hate to say it, but I think we'll still be stuck with term limits. I hope I'm wrong. Well, I'll let Pat jump on now. I think I have one other thought, but I can't come up with it.
Let me know and I'll stop and you can put it in.
All right.
Well, as a community, I think Montana and the United States will be comprised of people who move significantly toward more civility. I think we will tire of the angry people, including the guy walking into the Mo Club downtown here with his gun on his hip, so proud of it, you know. I think we'll tire of that, even people in a gun-toting state like Montana. I think we'll become more respectful of, instead of less respectful. We're going through that time now. For about 20 years, since early 80s, we've been increasingly less respectful of the people we elect to serve us, whether it's, well, it's usually at a national level, but even below that. I think that will begin to improve. I think education will continue to bedevil us a little. How do we, you know, why is it that when Jay Leno goes out on the street and holds up a picture of Joe Biden and says, "Who is this?" he almost always finds somebody who says, he manages the Green Bay Packers, doesn't he? You seen that? I'm really worried about that, and I'm not sure how we fix that, because the teachers are really trying. So we've got to have some kind of, as Lawrence said, we've got to get all into a reform thing, and still protect teachers and protect mill levies and bond issues and the rest of it, but maybe pull together a little better, as the Board of Humanities encourages all over America. And then I think there's going to be a breakthrough. Don't know what it is. I think there's going to be a breakthrough in America's technology that is going to see 50 years of significant economic change for the better. I think we are on the verge, primarily because of American universities. I think we are on the, which, you know, people from India and China, and you want to go to the best schools, post-secondary, you got to come to America still in this world. So I think we're going to, the scientists are, and people like Bill Gates and the rest of it. So you got to include capitalism in this, but I think we're going to have a breakthrough somewhere, somehow, that's going to remake the American economy and once again make us a world leader. And then finally, I think this is more contentious. I kind of like to end with something a little more contentious that gets our blood going, you know. I believe that 25 years from now, you won't be able to find a member of Congress who tells his grandkids, you know, I voted against that health care bill. And you know why? Because I think it's going to expand this economy. I think it's going to expand medical schools, nursing schools. It's going to expand medical technology. There is a ton of money coming out of this bill in the next 20 years for medical technology. We're going to see huge scientific breakthroughs in medicine, and we're going to see the economic benefits that come from that. And Americans, it'll take a little while, but Americans are once again going to be proud that we joined those nations. We're going to be embarrassed for a long time that we didn't do it sooner. That we joined those nations that cover all their people with insurance somehow or other. We're going to be very proud of that. And you know, you're going to have to hunt with a dog to find a member of Congress who's going to tell his grandkids, I didn't vote for that health care. By God, I was standing right with you. I think it's going to be the other way around. Do we need some improvements in it and whatnot? Oh, sure. And did it come out the way Pat Williams wanted? No, but what the hell? They did it. And I think that's one of the breakthroughs, although the big ones are still to come. America's, I don't want to get too back in those old days you talked about, but America has got to get back to being bold. Our people have got to become bold again, and adventurers and pioneers and risk takers. Both conservatives and liberals can do that together and have done it together in the past. And when we do that, I think we're going to see around the middle of this century, maybe not quite that long, I think we're going to see an America that our children are really going to be proud to wear that little American flag on their lapel again. Yeah.
On that note, thank you both, Lawrence and Pat, and thank you all.
Thank you. Nice ending. I really enjoyed it.
That was great.
Thank you.
Oh, I enjoyed the hell out of it too.